Let's go!
The year is 1932. The setting is a small town in Denmark called Billund, and the Great Depression is taking its toll on a recently widower father trying to support his 4 young boys after the passing of his beloved wife. The man, Ole Kirk Christiansen, was a skilled carpenter that couldn't afford toys, so he began making and crafting toys using his carpentry skills. Initially making wooden ducks, cars, and yo-yos, individuals began showing interest in this fine craftsmanship, and they were known for their quality and durability. As his woodworking crafts and toys began to gain traction, Ole began forming a close bond with his 3rd son, Godfred. At the age of 12, they formed an enormous bond, dreaming and imagining new creations together, which eventually turned into a co-founding of one of the world's most known toy companies in history. In 1946, Ole bought the very first ever plastic injection molding machine after seeing it at a trade fair. This led him and his son building the very first plastic, as they called them, automatic binding bricks in 1949. Something that they continued to perfect and craft up until Ole's passing in 1957. He then turned his company, Lego, which is actually a blend of the Danish words lie goat, meaning play well, which coincidentally, interestingly, lie goat in Latin means I put together, as just one of life's happy coincidences. He turned Lego over to his son, who a year after his dad's passing, perfected his final rendition of the binding bricks into the iconic studs and tube brick design we know today, which is now sold in over 130 companies and have a valuation of over $13 billion today. When I think of the future, while it's still possible to conceive of tangible widgets and doodads becoming an iconic household brand, I reflect on things like the advent of AI, software development, and general move to digital experience in general, that caused me to believe that the future of innovation will be one of a technological frontier, more so than a movement to more plastic tangible. Therefore, it stands to reason that sharing video games and the time playing them together could, not unlike Ole Kirk Christiansen and his son Godfred, produce opportunities for bonding and connection of both an extrinsic value, but an intrinsic value as well. Indeed, this is even backed up in research. A 2020 ESA study and a 2019 Oxford study showed that parents who game with their children develop stronger self-confidence, technical and digital literacy skills, and other workplace and professional skills. Furthermore, multiple studies, including a 2022 BYU and a 2018 Computers and Human Behavioral Journal study, found that the benefits of social development, including increased empathy, or being able to sort through advanced moral dilemmas, were found to have increased inside of children and parents playing games together. There are also self-reported studies that speak to experiencing strong emotional connections with those who play. And this also holds true outside the family unit. A 2023 Advances in Social Sciences Research Journal survey found that 1 in 3 couples now, so 1 in 3 couples are playing games together weekly. And even romantic relationships. A 2019 Pew Research study found that 39% of couples indicated meeting online as the formation of their relationship, with gaming being one of the top areas for establishing this bond. And finally, a 2020 MMO study found around the World of Warcraft that 25% of adult players reported forming a significant and often romantic relationship with another player. So 1 in 4. So clearly, games, like hobbies of old, are growing as a subset in a genre that are moving us towards stronger bonds between one another. So this had Gav and myself wondering, how do the games we play help us connect to others in meaningful ways? And what can we learn about that? This is Lessons from Gaming, or LFG. I'm ZeffEpics, Zeff for short.
And I'm GavelGamer, Gav for short.
Lessons from Gaming is where we explore the real-life lessons we glean from the games we play on the screen. So, a quick spoiler thing, it's going to be not a spoiler episode. This topic, this discussion that we wanted to have today is really more about gaming in general, We will definitely be talking games. I'm sure Gav has examples. I certainly have some for my discussion points that I wanted to talk about. We'll probably have us going into some mid-game elements, but usually we'll stay away from those end-game spoilers or something that would ruin your experience. We try to avoid that, but as always, we know that we cannot be perfect. We don't try to be. So take it upon yourself. Know that only you can prevent spoiler sadness. So, Gavel, I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this topic. I gave a lot of why I found it fascinating. There's lots of research around it, all those things, but none of that is really important. It really is just a question of what value do I get out of these games, and I think that that bond or that connection to one another is a significant thing that has a lot to talk to. So, I'd love to hear what your thoughts were on this topic.
Sure. Thanks so much, Zeff. And I really appreciated this question. I think your intro got at some of the clear answers that we have to some of this. For example, couch and internet cooperative play, I think, is a massive component to how players can share experiences with one another via games, and through that, and through those experiences, come to learn a lot of life's skills. For example, about problem solving, like you said, about strategizing, about following instructions, about achieving common goals. You'll often see this again in cooperative types of situations where you might have a multiplayer type of game, shoot 'em up, for example, where players need to achieve a common goal. That's I think a really clear and clean cut answer to some of these questions. That's not exactly the route that I was going to go in today. I wanted to talk about something a little bit different. Maybe you'll go in there in your topic, but I thought those studies were fascinating. The core theme that I wanted to talk about today was something very different. And that is how video games give us a collection of shared traditions. Now, what do I mean by that? I think that these shared traditions are a common set of customs or ideas relating to gaming that transcend time and space. These can be external or internal to the content of the games themselves. And I'd just like to go through a couple of examples of that. So, an external tradition, I think, is something that is akin to a physical custom or ritual that gamers may engage in outside of the games themselves. For example, a common one would be midnight releases. A lot of players will go through and experience the joy and the excitement around a midnight release, for example, when a game drops. I know I did that with Skyrim, and the scene is the same. A lot of players will line up at their store of choice, whether it's GameStop or something else. We will see people we've never seen before and often will never see again, but the energy around those releases is infectious. People are there, they're hyped about the game, they're discussing the game, they're discussing games generally, what games they like, what they are planning to do with that game, what they've done in other games. And we would come together and chat about these games, current and old, and the energy around those events was just infectious. And going to those events, talking about them now, you can see that we none of us ever had to go to the same one, but just to experience that type of energy together. As soon as you talk about a midnight release to someone else, someone will have a story about that. And it's just a great way to begin talking and begin a conversation about gaming, about events, about someone's past, about someone's history. It's a great icebreaker, but it's also a great way just to have a conversation with someone. That's a tradition, it's a ritual that a lot of people engaged in external to the games that a lot of people can immediately resonate with, even if it's not the same game, even if we are separated by thousands of miles. It's something that we all did. I think another example of this kind of external tradition is actually just something simple as an image. And the image that I have in mind for this simple example is something that we've all seen before from like a retro or nostalgic gaming account on X or Twitter. And the picture is usually the same. It's a dimly lit room at night with maybe a pizza box and a soda in the foreground that are all dimly illuminated by the glow of a CRT TV, usually displaying the title screen of a particular game. And that image is so iconic for a lot of people, regardless of what game it is, because it speaks to something that many of us experienced as kids growing up. This idea of being a kid late at night in a room alone when everyone else was asleep and it was just you and your game. And maybe you had a snack and a drink to enjoy, but it was just you and your game. And that is how you experienced this artistry of whatever it was that you were playing at the time. The actual game that you're playing doesn't matter, but it was that ritual, that practice, that shared experience that many of us have that we can all immediately resonate with, regardless of where we were, regardless of where our upbringings were, regardless of where we grew up, regardless of any other socioeconomic status we might have. A lot of people have that experience. And that's something that I think taps pretty deeply into what it means to play games, especially as a kid. And so that type of imagery is immediately evocative to many gamers across the entire gamut of the world, regardless of where you came from. And so that's, I think, just that idea, that imagery is something that we all share that brings us together, again, regardless of what game it is. And it didn't even have to deal with the game itself. The other issue that I wanted to bring up today, that was sort of the external traditions, the things sort of around the games. Another thing that we can discuss, I think, is these internal traditions, what I'm calling internal traditions. Those are a little bit more obvious. Those are the shared experiences that gamers have with a game's content that maybe we can explore after the fact through a conversation or dialectic. So I can start with a quick example. I think that all of us know people on social media through their thoughts on the games they like and dislike. And we tend to feel a camaraderie with those who like the same games we do, especially when their reasons for doing so match ours. These bonds can get pretty close, even though we might never actually ever personally see these people. We feel like we know them in some way. It's not a perfect heuristic, obviously, but nothing about this is surprising. And I think the question is why? Why do games allow us to form bonds that are this close? Like we feel like we know someone with people that we've actually never physically seen. And I think the answer is that discussing games gives us an insight into people's perspectives. And what life is exploring these perspectives and the outlooks that people have through their events going through life. And everyone has their own ideas and views about the world. They're informed by an infinite number of things: your background, your geography, your family, your circumstance, your history. Part of life is communicating these ideas, I think, among ourselves in an effort to make the world better, at least for the people who like to be productive. The problem, though, is that the world is infinitely complex. The sheer number of variables that can impact our decisions and influence our minds is almost impossibly intractable to account for in any kind of coherent way. And so sometimes the best thing we can do is just to rely on certain emergent ideas. But what games do is what games allow us to do is simplify that set of variables so that we have a common universe of facts and concepts to work with. And it's that bounded universe that reduces the number of free variables that we have to account for so that we can share ideas and concepts about life and simply how to be given that narrower universe of possibilities. So, what games do is they give us this way to share our thoughts and ideas about the world with others across time and space. Again, it doesn't matter where you grew up, it doesn't matter when you played a game. Someone could play a game in the 90s, someone could be playing the game right now in 2025. It does not matter. These two people across time and space can communicate concepts that would otherwise almost be impossible to achieve and resolve in any kind of coherent way without that bounded set of universe. And so I think in many ways, those communications are the lessons that we all learn from games. It gives us a shared tradition, it gives us a shared history. Everyone who has played, for example, Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy VII or Earthbound can speak to what happens in those games. They're going to have a perspective on that game, whether it's the narrative, whether it's the battle system, the plot, the characters, the UI elements, whatever it is. There are, again, almost an infinite number of things we can talk about, but everyone's going to have a perspective on those ideas. And they are ways that we can share in this thing called life with people that aren't even geographically or even temporally experiencing the same things at the same time. And I think that games are beautiful for that idea. So that's all that I actually had to say on this point, Zeff. I don't know if you have any questions.
Lots.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Hit me.
honestly. Some of them are just kind of fun. I want to get to know your experiences a little bit better. So I'm going to start with the first one. What I loved what you were saying about traditions, by the way, and the midnight game release. It just took me back to very fond memories. I didn't do that a lot. I don't know if you did, but I did not do that a lot. But some of my best memories came from some of those midnight releases. I think I did 3 or 4 of them in my younger age, and then I did my most recent one was Tears of the Kingdom. I was that excited for it.
Nice.
I didn't care.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
so
Nice, man.
excited for that. But I am interested because the challenge with the midnight release is what do you do after you pick up the game? So I just wanted to hear your what game was it that kept you up the longest after the pickup? What
The,
game was it? I'm just curious.
the last game that I played after a midnight release was Skyrim. I went to a midnight release for Skyrim, and we I went home. I went back to my apartment, and I played that game, I believe, for until like 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I had to get up for school. I think the next day. I think I had to do something the next day, but yes, I played until 5 o'clock in the morning, and then had to quickly go to sleep so I could actually get to bed at a reasonable, not it's not a reasonable time. I had to get to bed so I could actually maybe get a little bit of sleep before the next day.
That's not that bad. Gav, you're actually very responsible with the midnight release. I don't think you
Yeah, there you
realize it,
go.
but you're very responsible because I've actually had the sun come up kind of moment in a
No,
midnight
nice.
release before. I know for certain I was so excited for Ocarina of Time. It's probably one of my favorite memories of all time. Me and my cousin were so excited. We were gold cartridge first day buyers. We were super, super excited. We annoyed the crap out of the Walmart guy that we just kept asking if he would just give us the game. It was like 11.50 and he was like, I can't legally, just leave me alone, kids. You know, but we got the game, we went back home and I played until the sun was up. So, I'm sure it was 8 o'clock in the morning and or something like that. It was pretty late. So
That's
that's pretty
outstanding,
good.
man. Yeah.
When I think of some of those other traditions, the first one that came to my mind were LAN parties or just local network parties. Those are kind of dying with the advent of the internet, which is to me, that's a tradition that's going away. We lose traditions sometimes. And I think sometimes it's sad. I actually really loved that element of tradition in multiplayer
Yes.
gaming. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like it's kind of sad that that's going away. There isn't the same. It's fun to play over the internet and the web, and sure we have good technology where it feels like you're kind of there in the same room because you can talk to each other. There was nothing like those college in the same house but in different rooms cursing at each other playing Halo. It just there was nothing like that. That was
Yeah.
hilarious and good times, and I would go play like real-time strategy games, click and send my troops in, destroy their town, and then I'd go down to like gloat in their face as as I'm wiping
Yeah.
out their town.
That's funny. Yeah.
Those are some of those traditions that land play is almost you brought up a tradition that I would also argue that midnight releases is dying, but those traditions, they are important and I hope they hang on a little bit longer
Yeah.
because I think they create very memorable memories. I don't know if you have some thoughts about that, but those were just the ideas that I had in that one.
Yeah, I think that the LAN parties were great for being an extension of couch co-op. And
Yeah.
so for those who grew up even really before LAN parties became massive, at least for me, often what you would do is a friend would come over to your house or you'd go over to their house and you'd play on the same screen. You'd have a split screen, right? It was harder to see usually. Sometimes, the game console couldn't even handle it. If you're playing GoldenEye, for example, good luck playing a four-player multiplayer on that. It would really slow down if everyone had RCP 90s, for example, right?
Yeah.
Um, the frame rate would drop to like single digits. It was ridiculous. But still, at the same time, it was always a good time. And I think
Yeah.
what LAN parties were extensions of that, where everyone would have their own screen, but you were all in the shared space, shared environment, and it was just a way to bring people together to enjoy a shared experience and tradition together. So yes, absolutely. I think it's spot on, man.
My brother was so competitive that before LAN parties, I remember him setting up like a cardboard separation for our split screenplay, and I had to sit on the left side of the cardboard, and he had to sit on the right.
Nice. Yeah.
That's how intense it got.
It
But
gets
yeah,
competitive, man. Yeah.
yeah,
That's funny.
the local multiplayer now it's all moved to couch co-op, like you've said, but the local multiplayer, I know they still have it in some forms, but it's just not very popular.
And couch co-op is certainly coming back. I think even in the indie games, for example, I know like
that's
Sea of
true.
Stars has it. I know a couple of other
And then
games
there's
that
that
have
new
it
split
too.
fiction one that
Yeah,
looks really cool. And did you ever play It Takes Two? Have you ever played that one?
I haven't, and I need to.
Good night, Gav. Yes, you do. With your
I
daughters,
know,
and especially, they'll love it. Like
I know.
I played it with my son, and we couldn't get enough. We like blitzed
Nice.
through it in 2 days, 3 days, and we were staying up late to do it. And it was just great memories. It's got a little bit of an adult message, but not your daughters could handle it. Definitely one I'd recommend. Uh,
Absolutely, we'll do that.
yeah. So I have a couple more. Sorry, you're gonna bear with me, but uh, thank you for the image section. It felt like I was going back into a time machine. The pizza box, all the CRT, everything. I was wow, like I was there as you were describing it. I was there. You are very good at description, and this is one thing I really appreciate about you. But I just felt like you put me into a time machine. But TVs were a big deal. The other one that I think of is if I just see a picture of a controller, regardless of the setting, unless it's on some sort of manufactured background or something like that. If I just see a picture of a controller, it doesn't even matter even if it's current. It's like another time machine. It just takes me back. So if I see the old N64 controller, that was my very first system. Nostalgia just by seeing that controller itself. So
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
what other, there's the TVs, their controllers, any other things that stick out to you as those time. I think the cartridges. Sorry, I'm taking all your answers probably, or possible answers, but there are those just iconic images that you were talking about, and I just thought that was a really cool point.
Well, one of the things, so this is not exactly an answer to your question, but what I would often do, I did this for, 17 years or so. I'd have to count it up. From seven until basically the end of, when I was seven until the end of college, I would play a no-death Zelda 2 run every Christmas Eve. And that's just what I did. And I know that's not exactly what you were asking about. You were looking for more imagery. But another thing I think that games allow us to do is there are actually, I know that there are people who do that. For example, I know that we've talked about this with people on X before. Some people do very similar types of things on Christmas Eve or some other day where they know they're going to have a holiday. They will play a game in remembrance of a parent or remembrance of just what it meant to them growing up. And that's another shared tradition I think that a lot of people have, regardless of whether you do it at the same time, regardless of what game it is. It's a thing that people do that brings them back to a time and a place that I think is very meaningful, and it allows us to talk about those things, and it's one way in which those games mean so much to us. But I do think that that's one way in which people can build these traditions as well around time. People will replay games often, and the question is, well, why? Well, what does it mean to replay a game? Why are you replaying it? And the answer is as long, as long as the day is. But we're not going to investigate all that today. But those answers, I think, are very elucidating as to why we are doing this. And so, yeah, that was just one thing that popped into my mind. Obviously, if we wanted to get into the actual imagery itself, it's hard for me to really escape the sort of that beautiful CRT screen. I didn't
Yeah.
think I'd like it as much as I do. So whenever I try to play retro games, if there is a CRT type of filter on the video input or the video that's being displayed, I will usually do it. And I found that it's remarkable how simple that one change can be to bring you back to your childhood or just to bring you back to what you remember.
Mm.
I was blown away when I started doing that on, for example, my Retron 5 that I have to play old games, on certain games that I play on emulators. I was blown away by how simple of a change that can be, but how profound of a change that imagery would have on my recognition of what I was seeing on the screen. So that is something that I think is huge.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And you really did actually hit. I had two more things that I wanted to kind of talk to you about, and you bridged really well into the fourth one, actually. So I had four questions here. My last one, which was maybe not a question, but more a comment. I really loved your description around how games can be used as that time and space tool, and you kind of hit on it again. I think games do this better than other mediums. You know, if I go back and watch old there are exceptions to this. Star Wars is timeless. Whether you like the series or not, it's pretty crazy how well those movies hold up. And there are certainly movies that just hold up and they're timeless. And I think they do, really well. Games, I know we have these discussions all the time about how they don't hold up. Usually, when I hear that, it's more of a technical limitation that people are describing, not so much. If it's a story-based game, usually people are like, "Oh, the story's great," or it holds up really well. And being able to discuss those things, I'm always amazed. I see all these younger YouTube influencers or individuals that are talking about games, and they're describing like Mario 64 in the same terms that I felt. And I just think that time and space tool that you were kind of hitting on, that's what I'm calling it. That's so true. It never ceases to amaze me that these people can have the same feelings that I had as a little kid way back when Mario 64 released, that just blew my mind. And when they describe it, now they're 20 years younger than me and they're describing it in the same way. And that's just so cool. I just find that as such it's a little bit of what I wanted to talk about in my section, but I just think that your time and space tool is such a good point.
I
Um,
think there's a reason for that, Zeph. I think there's a reason why games can do that better than other media, such as books and movies, which, fine, they're great, but I think games have a unique perspective on that. And that's because, in many ways, books and movies are lectures. They're lectures.
mm,
There's a bounded, very bounded set of universe of the text on the pages or what you're seeing on the screen. Now, the things that you can discuss in those books, and again, the films, is near infinite, sure. No problem there. I'm in no way trying to denigrate those types of media. But video games present something very different. Video games, at least the good ones, are not lectures. They are experiences. And at most, they are hypotheses
mm,
about the world. And so, what does it mean to be an experience for a game? It means that the reason why these people across time and space can be articulating something that you felt 20 years ago is because what they are experiencing is very akin to your own self and your own realization of a discovery of what it means to discover something 20 years ago. They are going through that same exact process today. They're not being lectured at, they're not just kind of seeing pixels on a screen necessarily. It's much more profound than that, even for relatively simple games. You talked about Mario 64, right? Talk about Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, right? Someone playing that today, yes, okay, we can talk about the technical limitations, what have you, fine. But someone playing that today is going to go through a very similar type of profound realization with some of those dungeons, the way the world is laid out, that you and I went through, for example, maybe in 1998 when that game
mm,
came out. And that, I think, is something that games can do uniquely different than other media because they are interactive, they are experiential, they are more about self discovery and realization and exploration in ways that you can't explore a film. You see what you see on a screen. And film is even better than, for example, books, for example. This you can't walk down the road in a book. You can't know what's there. That was something that always piqued my interest growing up. I'll get into this maybe in another talk we have. I call it the space between places. Whenever I was watching a movie growing up, for example, Beauty and the Beast, there's a simple scene when Belle is trying to go to the castle and she's just going down a path and you see some random hut there. I remember this image vividly to this day. And I often wondered as a kid, what's there? Who lives there? What does that person do for a living? What are they like? What's in the room? Do they have a desk? What's in the desk? Do they write letters? What do their letters say? You could begin to start asking all of these infinite number of questions. You'll never know that going through the movie. It's not important because it has nothing to do with the actual plot of the movie. But in games, like an open world game like Skyrim or Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring, they can provide answers to those questions. And I think good game designers for games like that will leave hints and clues and environmental patterns and environmental hints and play things that for you to find, again, these discoveries for you to find that can provide a profound meaning to a player in a way that you just can't achieve with other media by asking yourself, what is over that next ledge? What is over that hill? For example, Elden Ring was great at this because you could tell that because often the designers, the developers would, for example, hide items or, like little gleans in a particularly well hidden place, informing you that they knew that it was tough to get there and they were rewarding you for having found a way to get there. That kind of stuff can be absolutely compelling and infectious for a player. That's the kind of stuff that I think is very different with video games. So it's a long answer to your question, but I think that that is why games can do this so acutely in ways that other media can't even hope to achieve.
Yeah, no, and it you actually did answer it really well because I have actually wondered a little bit, if you've played all the wonderful 3D platformers that we have today, Mario 64 blew my mind. It was incredible. There was nothing like it at the time. That the idea of a camera system that could follow around behind you. There was the concept of 3D. Certainly PlayStation and Super Nintendo had kind of that fake 3D, but the camera following behind you and spinning it around and looking at it, that was new for, certainly on console. I mean, I'm sure PC gamers, they frequently are like, oh, we did it first, but for a console player, that was new. And so it was crazy, right? And so that's kind of what I was talking about too, is just how does it become exciting for them knowing that they've experienced things where for me I was experiencing that new thing at a new time. You did a good job explaining why. It's because you're working within the framework of that world and you're also working within the narrative of that world, and that's why they are able to experience it despite having a 2 decade difference in age. And I think that was a really good thing. And so for me, there are three things that kind of stuck out to me about why I think games bring us together. And some of them are similar to the points that you made, but I think I'm approaching them from a different lens. And so you'll have to tell me if they're exactly the same or different, but I definitely see them as different. And the first one is you were speaking a little bit about the time and space element, but I want to talk about how gaming transcends age. And I think, and it was kind of already teased a little bit with the Mario 64 thing, but that actually wasn't the example that I was thinking about. I was thinking about when I think about the intro that I just gave, there's this hobby that a father and a son have, and they were able to connect on that, and they were able to turn it into this huge company, super like iconic, everybody knows it. But I think connecting generations in a meaningful way is something that only a few things can do, right? I think of the game of golf, basketball, video games. There's a few things that can transcend age. Not everything can do that, right? There's a lot of things that are more mature and people need to be older to do it together. And there are a lot of things that are immature and, Gav, if me and you ran into each other, we're not going to go and play tag, right? Like that is as an example. There are things that age creates a need for separation, right? And
Right.
gaming to me is one of those things that transcends age, and I love that about games. And I think of when I was younger and I was playing games with people that I just was dying for their attention, but I was able to do it in games. They didn't, I had older cousins that, wouldn't let me play basketball with them, and I loved basketball or whatever, but they sometimes they let me play and sometimes they wouldn't because, I get it. I'm 6, 7, 8 years younger. It's harder to bring that person to play basketball, but we sit down, we play a game, doesn't matter. We're equals, we can play, I can even win, right? And that's so cool that gaming can transcend age in ways that other hobbies and mediums can't. And I think of when I was in high school, I used to go over and spend time at my brother's house, who was college. My brother was 7 years my senior. Mario Kart 64, FIFA Soccer, as I said, Halo. These were games that I could play with people decades, a decade older than me or a decade younger than me, and it was fine. And it was so cool. And I just love how gaming can bring people from all ages together in ways that other mediums can't. That, and another more recent example is the game that I just finished, which I just cannot describe how great it was. I finished a game called Neva. It's by a company that made Gris, who I also love. If I were to ever lead off with where games can be art, I would point to Gris and Neva, which is an indie game, and it's a beautiful game, aesthetically, visually. Just I could listen to the game rather than playing it and enjoy it. But Neva was a great game. I would actually say that it was the better game between Gris and Neva. But Neva is a very, very important game to me now, and I want everyone to play it. But without being spoiler laden, my daughter decided to come in. It's a short game. You can do it in 4 hours, and you should. Everybody should. But my daughter came in and watched the last 2 hours with me. And my daughter's 8, and I'm obviously much older, as you can see in my picture, a lot older guy, but we have this big gap. But the game finished, and we spent 45 minutes talking about the ending. And I don't want to give it away, but I walked out of that room feeling super connected to her. We got into some very deep stuff. She brought up some things that I didn't even know that she thought about, or it was an amazing experience, and I loved it. And if nothing else, the game was great, but just having that moment with my daughter, and if you play the ending, it's not like I will say it's interesting. I almost want to give the voice actor some sort of award, and the voice actor said one word the entire game, which was Neva. Well, maybe two, but the point is just an amazing performance year round. But it produced, and I bring that up only to say there's not a lot of dialogue, there's not a lot of written story. In fact, almost none. But there was this long, robust dialogue about the ending with my daughter, and I just loved that. I love that. We are many years apart, but we were able to do that. Another point is gaming brings different styles, and you talked about this a little bit, but different styles and backgrounds together. I can bond over games with somebody from any walk of life where normally I might not have that much in common with them. I have cousins and friends and acquaintances and work colleagues and other people that outside of those settings, if I'm not forced to sit next to them at a family reunion and talk about the weather and other small talk, if they bring up a game, we're talking for a long time. And I love that about games. You don't have to be similar in anything else in life. But if you bring up a game that you both love, you can talk for hours. And I just love that about games. And I think that, I think about games like StarCraft, and I remember Chrono Trigger. My cousin, my friends, we kind of played it at the same time. Don't really have a lot in common with these people that I'm talking about, but we just talked for hours. You brought up Earthbound. even Metroid, a game that I actually am not like, I'm gonna kill some people here, but I am not a huge Metroid fan. I know you are, Gav. Sorry,
I am.
but but
It's all
Metroid,
good,
I
man.
would talk to people about it, even though I'm not like a huge fan of it. I talk to them about it because I find at least the world interesting, even though it's not my cup of tea. I find it interesting, and so I can talk about it. And when I think about right now, a more recent example, my nephew, his parents tended to be a little bit more conservative about games, and so my sister came to me and said, "I'm thinking about getting, your nephew a game." And she said, "I'm thinking of getting him Breath of the Wild." And I kind of pleaded with her. I said, "Look, sister of mine, you need to let him play more than 20-minute sessions. It's Breath of the Wild. You can't, they had these, you earn 20 minutes at a time." I was like, "You can't do that to him. He needs to experience more than that, or don't get him that, or get him something else. Go get him Mario." And she
That would be a
agreed.
very
And
tough game to play. That would be a
yeah,
very
in
tough game to play in
20-minute increments,
short
right?
sessions. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sorry to
And
cut you off. I just can't even imagine that.
no, no, yeah, 20 minutes, you can't do it. And so I said to her, "Please don't do that to him." And he's texting me. I've not talked to this nephew very much other than at family reunions and get-togethers. He's texting me constantly. He's sending me questions. He's sharing exciting moments with me. I love it. I'm so, I went out and bought him the expansion pass because I was just so excited that he was playing Breath of the Wild, a game that I am, episode 1, very passionate about. I love it to a depth that people can't understand, but I was so excited to connect with this person who's thousands of miles away, who I only see every once in a while, and we are bonding so wholeheartedly despite not having anything else in common, right? I mean, yeah, we're family, but he's my nephew and I don't see him ever, but we're bonding in very meaningful ways over Breath of the Wild right now. And it's making me excited to talk about Breath of the Wild and all that stuff. It's just I'm he just barely did Gerudo Town and he just got the outfit and I was like, we were laughing about it. It's just so much fun. And then here's my last point. Gaming forces you, when shared, to examine, and you've talked about this a little bit too in your answers, make decisions and choices that when done with another person allows for you to have a safe environment to evaluate the outcomes of those decisions. The example, and I know that was a long word salad, so I'm gonna break it down into one example. Leroy Jenkins is funny for a reason, right? Game decisions can matter very greatly to people. And Leroy Jenkins to me is still to this day one of the funniest things in the history of like ever. I know some people take the Leroy Jenkins side. I know some people take the Raid Guild side. I don't take either side. I just take the side of that. I think it's one of the funniest things that's ever happened in the history because they're all sitting around talking. If anybody hasn't seen it, please go watch Leroy Jenkins. If you're a gamer and you haven't seen Leroy Jenkins, you're not hitting one of our, as a community, most fundamental videos of being a gamer is understanding and watching the Leroy Jenkins video. And some people don't find it funny. Some people are annoyed by it. They get viscerally angry by it. But to me, I just find it hilarious. And it's because, they're sitting around for 20 minutes talking about their strategy and he gets bored. And so he stands up and says, "Okay, let's do this, Leroy Jenkins." And he screams it and he runs in. And it's hilarious. And it's because the decisions we make when we co-op, when we play together, they have real impact on people, right? I love like in games like World of Warcraft, the fact that you have to pick classes. If you all run in as tanks, you're gonna lose. You have to think about these things. You have to assemble groups that have different styles and personalities and things. And I remember playing co-op with people from work and school in college and feeling bad that I let them down if I wasn't, if I was a bad healer or I didn't do my job well. It's just, these weren't important decisions. These weren't life and death critical. Sure, I got over it 5 seconds later, but it gives this environment for you to reflect on consequence and decisions. And there's even like National Institute of Child and Health and Human Development study in 2021, and it found that people who shared hobbies like gaming, now the game type matters in this study, but they were able to work through stressful situations better together after playing those games. And that's what I'm talking about. It's like it gives you an environment, a vehicle to allow your decisions and choices to impact somebody else and then respond and react to that and determine what you're going to do about it. And so those are the three elements that I want to talk about, Gav. Loved your comments throughout, but if you have any other thoughts or comments, you don't have to ask me questions. Like those are my elements, right? The transcending age, bringing different styles and backgrounds together and forcing you to live and make decisions in an environment that allows for fulfillment of discussion and those types of things.
Sure. So I thank you, Zeff. That was a really thorough conversation. I guess I can take these questions in inverse order. Going first to the consequences that you talked about. Why do you think it's so important for games to maybe force people, if you will, to make decisions and see the outcomes of those decisions? Why do you think why was that something that you hit on today? What do you think that means or exposes or reveals about life, about the player, about people, or life itself?
I kind of am undoing it a little bit with the Leroy Jenkins thing because it did matter, but it also doesn't matter. And that's why I use the word safe, right? It's important to me because we don't get a lot of opportunities in life for do-overs and for living with a consequence that isn't creating damage or creating problems. And can a game do that? Yeah, I've had relationships never me, but I've seen people, have strife in actual relationships over something that happened in games. I've seen people
Yeah.
react in anger in certain ways, but like more than likely, games provide this safe environment for choices that you make to be contained in a safe medium that allow you to learn more about each other. And that's why I brought that up is it's one of those things where you can learn a lot about somebody and the choices that they make in a game. Now, I don't think that you should play games in co-op or multiplayer and like constantly be over analyzing the person that you're playing with, because sometimes people just do things because in the game it's funny to do it. But my point is even that you learn stuff about people. And I think it's a good vehicle for a safe environment to do that. If I do that at work or at school or other social scenarios, the consequences of a bad decision are more permanent and lasting. In a game, your guy is revived, your last save is restored, your whatever, right? And I think unlike other mediums and unlike other things, you can't get that in a movie because it's not interactive, right? This is one thing that is unique to gaming, is this propensity for a choice to be able to be played out and to learn from it.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is also a precedent to a lot of that is even just the act of making a choice itself, right? Video games have a way of forcing you to make choices in order to even progress through any modicum of the game, right? It's the ultimate razor of equivocation. You can't just say both or everything all the time because the game will force you to make a choice. You have to take item X or Y, for example. You have to pick a route to go in for raiding a castle, for example. You just have to pick one. And there are pros and cons to both. But no matter what you do, you eventually have to make a decision. And I think games are ways of doing that. Like you said, it's a safe way to do it, one that have consequences. But I think even the act of making a choice itself is important because
Yes.
what I often find today is a lot of people is in a joking kind of way, and I'll do this too in a jovial, again, very joking, kind of laughing kind of way. You'll be presented with two options or three or more, and then everyone will just say, well, both. They don't want to actually take a decision. They don't want to make a decision because deciding is hard. And deciding forces you to actually have to, in theory, justify what you do, right? But that's what life is. Again, that is what we can't just sit here and equivocate all day, paralysis by analysis, or have everything at our disposal. We have to make choices. We have to decide what to do in any given moment. And so, like you say, I think it's actually a nice way of mapping that reality in a safe way. Again, as you said, I think that's very important for people. Without even knowing it, it forces them to do that in a way that you can't just do with words alone, for example.
I,
That
I'm
was
I'm
a
feeling
yeah.
very exposed because I am like number one indecisive person, fence sitter in the world, and I agree with what you're saying entirely. It sometimes creates anxiety for me in games,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that I have that opportunity to work through it because indecisiveness for me does produce a lot of angst, and games kind of force me to realize that sometimes they matter, but it's not that big of a deal or whatever. But it sounds like you were going to make another point. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, not at all. I'm a very indecisive person too. So I recognize that and I try to be better about it. But I think that's one thing that games are good at. They force me to make a decision and say, okay, at this point, it's good enough. I'll just move forward and see I'll see what happens. And if it goes horribly wrong, okay, I'll fix it. Right.
Yep.
But that way, at least something happens. At least life happens. At least something happens. Right. Rather than just sitting and wondering about possibilities. So I just thought that was a really interesting idea. Um, Another question I had about this idea of bridging gaps, how you say that games can bridge gaps not only through time, but also through generations. Abstracting out, what do you think it is about games that you think lends themselves to having these types of multi-generational discussions like those that you talked about? I can give you a quick example just to kind of lead this off. My oldest daughter watched me play Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, at least portions of it, not the entire game, but at least portions of it. And she's 10, and she immediately attuned herself to the love triangle, if you will, between Cloud, Aerith, and Tifa. It was palpable, it was there. I didn't tell her that it existed, but she took that up immediately. And we had had a long conversation about that, about what this was like, about what Cloud's choices might reveal. And she was really interested in that in a way that I didn't necessarily expect. I didn't teach her to be interested in that. I wasn't inviting conversations about that, but it was just something that she picked up on and thought was really interesting. So what do you think it is about games that tends to, again, have and lend themselves to these multi-generational discussions that bridges not just time, but entire generations of people?
Yeah, I love the question because the answer came to me actually pretty rapidly. It's what I realized with Neva and my daughter. I think, unfortunately, age, because we exhibit it in so many other elements in life and it becoming such an overriding principle that it affects our judgment on assessing the person a little too harshly. So, what I mean by this, what I'm saying is, I made assumptions about what my daughter cared about, what she could understand, what she could process, what she could fathom, what she could be affected by. I made all those assumptions based off of history, and some of it was good and some of it was turned out to be wrong. Games, because of their interactivity and because of their, in some ways, simplicity in their messaging. Nev is a game, as I said, that has no dialogue, but it actually has a pretty beautiful, complex story, and in some ways, in my opinion. And I didn't give, I don't give my daughter, and it sounds like you're probably saying the same. It's almost like we didn't give our daughters enough credit for what they're able to, we always, as parents, we are constantly like, oh my gosh, kids are sponges. What the heck? How did they pick up on all that? But it happens a lot. And that's why I think this transcending time and age that you were talking about with your the time space, but I'm speaking about just the age element. I think that generational thing, I just think that there is a games as a tool, they allow us to connect on unspoken emotional mental types of topics. Just produces a vibe that there's a common understanding that I just think that you underestimate, people based on age that they can pick up in games. And I don't know if that was a good answer to what you were saying, but that's the one that came to me.
No, absolutely, man. I think that makes a lot of sense. I guess piggybacking off that idea, a little bit differently, but sort of the same thing, talking now about time as players may play games across different time periods. How do you think time may affect the way that new players react to and interpret older games? It's a question that I think it's a broad question, but what do you have any thoughts on that? I was kind of wondering how you might interpret discussions of new player. When a new player, for example, plays an old game, say a game from the 90s, a JRPG from the 90s today, they're going to have that person is going to have certain feelings and thoughts on that game. How do you think time affects those reactions and interpretations of a work? Given that, for example, that games, we talked about how games are different. Games are different for books and media in that they are so technological based and technological driven that they are impacted by the status quo of technology, maybe more so than other media are.
This is happening more in gaming, and some people think it's a good thing and some people think it's a bad thing. And I certainly don't want to take it to any sort of discussion point that causes people to get upset. So I'm just going to keep it to this. And we've talked about this in previous episodes. We tend to take on the characteristics of the world that we're put in. We're okay with the rules, we're okay with the beliefs, the values, the morals of that world. I think for whatever reason, people can do that better in games than in other mediums. When I watch a movie from 40, 50 years ago and I see the commentaries on it, usually people are evaluating it through a modern lens. That's what I would call it. Like they are assessing it and evaluating it based on a modern lens. And there are things that happened 40 years ago that are super cringe today, and vice versa, right? They're just, that's the way that it works.
Right,
And
absolutely.
but with games, there are things that you often would find abhorrent from a moral perspective, from a social perspective, or whatever, but you can live within it because you're living within this world in this game. And I think that's my answer is I think that there is this capacity within games to put down our modern defenses or our modern value systems in some regards to just try to enjoy it. I just don't care. I like, is the game fun? Can I enjoy it? Can I
Yeah.
like get value out of it? I just don't care about like any of this stuff either way, and there are certainly cases where things are forced in, and there are certainly cases where things are, maybe not appropriate for the new ways of thinking. So it goes both ways all the time, but I just don't care about any of that at all. I just want the game to be fun and have like a message that I can get behind. And even in satire and even in like lighthearted and more serious moments, like I just, those are the things that I care about. Is it
Yeah.
fun and am I engaged? Everything else to me is just noise.
Yeah, yeah, those are certainly that's certainly a very pragmatic and a constructive way, I think, to view it. Just getting back to your point, I think one reason why gamers are so good about extracting themselves and putting themselves into these fantastical worlds is because many of them are fantastical, right? If you're accepting the lore of magic, for example, in a game, movies as well, but especially in a game, you kind of have to suspend your disbelief for a lot of other things. So I think it kind of makes it very obvious that we're dealing with more abstractions and a hypothetical universe than a real one, even though the issues being displayed are truly real, for the most part. It's a lot easier for people to discuss them as ideas rather than as maybe representations of things that are going on in everyday life. I think another reason too is just
But hold on,
because,
before you
yeah,
move on from that, why do you think people? Because I agree with you to an extent, but why do you think people have a harder time doing that in movies and music?
I think, well, for a lot of it, other than maybe sci-fi, a lot of it is realistic in nature.
Hmm. That's
It,
true. That's a good point.
even fiction, for the most part, is taking place in everyday settings. If someone is in England, right? England is a place. We know what it looks like. Even if it's England in the 60s, for example, there we have pictures of it, right? It's something that's more
Mm.
real, I think, than something taking place in Middle Earth, for example. Now, of course, obviously, books and movies, they have sci-fi, there's high fantasy, there's all of that. Um, but I do think that games, due to their interactivity, require an even bigger buy-in from the player that, oh yes, this is actually how things work. So when you're playing Mario, it doesn't matter that Mario can actually jump, you know, 4 times his body height, for example. It doesn't actually matter that it's stars that are powering the castle, for example. Right? There doesn't need to be a physical explanation for that level of detail in the game. You can just take it as granted and you can move on because that's just what the world is like. And so I think that because games have that buy-in and require that buy-in, because if you're getting hung up on the fact that Mario can jump really high, well, then you're not really going to be able to play much of the Mario game. It's probably not going to wow you. You have to put it down, right? You just go down every game that you can think of, just go down the gamut. There certainly are more realistic games. I'm not going to say that as well, but I do think that by and large, games do require more. They have more fantastical elements, and they do require more buy-in to the universe as a player that other media don't require because they're not interactive.
Do you want to get into some comments? Obviously, here, the first thing I want to say is we have some of you that have gone to our YouTube, which is obviously Lessons from Gaming, LFG. You can find us on YouTube or on Spotify, Apple, all that. Some of you have gone there every single time to support us, left comments. I would read your comments every single week because of how much I love that you are being that supportive to our show. We appreciate it. Trust me, me and Gav talk about this frequently. We appreciate the comments.
Yes.
Any comment, anytime, any like, any of that, it just really means the world to us. So if we don't ever read yours, don't take it personal. We really do read and study every single one. But
We do.
yeah, Gav, do you want to?
Zeff will literally call me. Zeff will literally call me, and we'll have long conversations about people's comments. It's fantastic. Yeah, yeah.
Yep, I will.
I love it, by the way. But yes, it's a thing. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. So, Gav, do you want to? What was the first one that you noticed?
Sure, I can launch off today. So one of the comments that I just wanted to talk about was from Sean on X. That's his at is at Stadelio. He brought up a point that I think also Ground, which is at Lifestream, says a very similar thing. And this was getting back to what makes a good villain. That was our topic last week. And he wanted a sympathetic villain. And what I think he meant by that was a villain whose motivations really made you sympathize with that villain that made them more real. And so he brought up Jin from Xenoblade Chronicles 2. He talks about how Jin is a peaceful warrior who had to fight across ages and in his many lives, and he really thrives for peace. He does what he must in order to protect his loved ones, and he hates the thought of starting over whenever their driver dies. That's really simple Xenoblade lore for Xenoblade 2. And in the end, he ends up seeing something awful and it sends him spiraling. And it was really easy for Sean and a lot of people to see why Jin descended the way he did. The reason why I thought that that was a very interesting comment was because either wittingly or unwittingly, I think Sean brought up an interesting idea from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and I just wanted to share an excerpt. I think he'll appreciate this of the lyrics from the theme of the Indolin Praetorium, which is where you meet Amalthus. So Sean talked about lives who thrive in peace, but yet are left to visit the darkness. Here are the lyrics. The path we chose is cold, and the dark has no place to dream. Must we go on? Will we ever prevail and smile in peace? And I think it's that question that Jin asks in Xenoblade 2. That's the peace that he sought in life. And without spoiling the game, that is the peace that I think he helps usher into the world, even as a villain, through his recognition of a couple that could actually achieve his dream. Remember, even Jin, I think it was Jin, once tells Mithra that Adam is not her true driver. There is another, and it's through her love of that driver that redeems the world and ushers in the peace that he thought was possible. So I just thought that was a really interesting question from Sean. He was using very similar language to the lyrics of one of the most beautiful pieces in that game, I think, musically. So I just thought that was a really interesting question from Sean.
Yeah, love Sean, and thank you so much for the comment. And I couldn't agree more. And I'm just glad that you two have a chance to bond over Xenoblade too. Once again, that's my favorite part about this.
Once
So,
again,
yes. Uh,
it's a thing.
so mine is from at Zorak90. He was on our YouTube, and he was talking about what you were mentioning, Gav, around how in 13 there was kind of a problem with the villain. He says, in 13 it felt like it was villains instead of villain. Right at the end, there was the true villain that appeared, and then he gives a spoiler name, but he says orphan, and then he says, the last one came out of nowhere. And I think that's actually what we were talking about. You spoke in that episode, and if you haven't had a chance to go watch it, please go watch Gav's really critical insight on what makes good characteristics of a villain. But he was talking about how if you haven't given them enough screen time, they cannot mean very much to you. And I believe that's what Zorak was saying here. And it really stood out to me as a really good point, because if they just come out of nowhere at the end and they're just thrown in, it just really ruins the immersion. And we talked about that a little bit last week, but I couldn't agree more. If you have like all these different villains and none of them have created any screen time commitment to you, and now they're just like there at the end, it just needs to be rethought if you're going to go that route. So thank you for the
Yeah,
comment.
yeah, absolutely love that comment. So the last one I have right now, Zeff, is from Pro Tempore Saitor, his at Pro Saitor on X. He had a list of a couple of ideas. I can just kind of rattle a couple of them off. One is what villains should not do. They should not engage in boring monologues. They shouldn't rely too heavily on their henchmen. They should not be afraid to kill other enemies if they get between them and their prey. They shouldn't be weaker or incredibly much more stronger than the hero. They should be able to match the hero in their strength, speed, and perseverance. And just kind of rattled off a lot of ideas. One of the things that I really thought was interesting about this comment was the idea, the very first one, the idea of monologuing. Because I think this goes into what we had also discussed in our theme last week, which is that villains can often play the role of a foil for either the protagonist or another character in the game. And what those foils often do is they allow the developers to play off ideas and thoughts about life, about philosophy, about how certain small changes, either in outlook, in temperament, in decisions, can make walloping effects in the world. And I think what monologuing does is it shows that there has been a breakdown of that process. I think it reveals that the writers didn't really fully grasp or confront the ideas that they were engaging in their stories. And so they have to rely on long monologues in order to make the plot make sense, in order for these ideas to actually come out, because it didn't come out in a more organic um, way or coherent way. And so they have to rely on just these long text bubbles in order for the villain to sort of give their exposition as to why things are the way they are. Certainly, you're going to have villains talk, but I think everyone has experienced a game where you have these extended monologues, and it really can break immersion, and it really can make a player, I think, frustrated with the villain, which is just, oh, well, it doesn't really matter what I do because the plot doesn't make sense, and the villain's just going to tell me what I needed to know all along anyway. So I just thought that was a very, very interesting comment because it fed into a lot of the things we talked about on our chat last week. So, or a
Yeah,
couple weeks ago, I should say.
yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to get booed out of the comment section here, but I will say that I just recently played Okami HD. Wonderful game. So before anyone gets upset with me with what I'm about to say, I would say it's a wonderful game. I'd say everybody should play with it. There were two aspects of that game that kind of took me a little bit out of saying that it was like one of those all-timers. Many people have it on their all-timer list. I would still recommend it to anybody. But one of the elements was just the paintbrush mechanic itself. I did it with a controller. I've heard that if you do it with a Wii remote or the Joy-Con, it would have been better. I probably should have done that because it's kind of hard to draw a bomb with a controller stick and all those kind of other things. But the other one was the dialogue of the enemies. There were parts that I loved about it. It's got that quirky, like older Zelda, funny, laughing stuff, which was great. I actually liked that. So it wasn't the actual dialogue itself. It was the length of the dialogue sometimes. Sometimes I was just finding myself like, hey, yeah. Okay, can I just get to the fight, please? And it really kind of, this beautiful, artistic, wonderful game. Sometimes I was just like, okay, enough dialogue. Can I please get back to the game, please? And so that was one of the things that I would say weighed it down for me a little bit, even though I would overall recommend it and say that it was a wonderful game. So, yeah.
There are secrets where fairies don't live. I was just gonna say there are secrets where fairies don't live. I love that kind of cryptic, cryptic line from the first original Legend of Zelda. I just love that line.
Yes.
Another game that actually had that that a little bit of that problem, and I love it to pieces, were the Golden Sun games. Love those games. Those games are fantastic. The dungeon design in those games is impeccable, and in some ways even better than many JRPGs today. One issue that's a common issue with the games is that the dialogue scenes can last a little bit longer than they really needed to. And so yes, that can take you out of the experience for sure. Love those games. They do have that extended dialogue problem.
Yeah, and so my last one is from our friend Broken Lobo. It was on YouTube. So thank you again so much, Broken Lobo, for your comment here. First of all, he said solid episode, and he gives some compliments to you, Gav, for your insights, and they're all well deserved and earned. He talks about how the conversation though helped him think about why he has this love for Naruto. He says, once you dig into each villain's motivations, you realize that you ultimately disagree. You can still empathize with them. And that was actually the point that I was making with my last point of the guy from God of War, falling out of my brain right now. But anyway, if you can empathize, and you mentioned that Sean said the same thing.
Kratos, I mean, you talk about the protagonist or the antagonist?
The antagonist. If you can empathize with them, it does help you connect to them more, is what the point is. And I think that's a little bit of what Sean's point was, and Broken Lobos. And so obviously that theming that we were hitting in the episode, it really did, that speaks to a lot of people, that if the motivations of the villain, you're empathetic to them, that makes them more memorable, is kind of the point. And I think you and I both hit that in our points when we were talking about it, but I think that it just kind of is a critical part of, if you're going to monologue or if you're going to talk or whatever, do you care? Can you empathize? Can you feel it yourself? So I think that's what both Broken Lobo, Sean, some others, yourself, others have kind of made. And I think it is a really, really critical point, is that you really have to be able to empathize with them.
Yeah, yeah. Was it Baldur? Is that who you're thinking
Baldur,
of?
thank you.
Yeah,
You've done this to me now twice. There's been episodes where I was just like, I don't remember the word, and then you saved me right at the end. So well done. You have a wonderful memory, and I appreciate that. So
there you go.
Do you have any other comments you want to make about our commenters?
No, just to say thank you so much. We really do appreciate the notes. I wasn't kidding. Zeff and I really do have conversations about all of the comments that you all leave. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We do read them. We appreciate them. We stew over them. And they often, as we've seen today, invigorate our thoughts and other games that we think that fit a lot of the ideas that you all share. So thank you so much. We really sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah, and before we close, I just wanted to say that we appreciate everybody that's gone over to our YouTube channel. We're just getting started. We're a really young channel. We're on our 4th episode now. I have actually made the mistake of, I have an extra copy of Mario Party Jamboree, which is a wonderful game. And so I want to kind of say thank you to anyone that is willing to go over to our YouTube channel, subscribe. I will put in a comment, and anybody that is willing to respond to that, you will be entered into a drawing, and I will send it to you. So you have to be okay with me sending it to an address, because it is a physical copy. So as long as you're okay with that, I will send you a copy of it. And it doesn't have to be for you. If you just want to win the game for a cousin or a nephew or a son or a daughter, it doesn't matter. You can enter. There is no other exclusion, but Since I have an extra copy and our topic today was about bonding over games, I figured why not give it away? Give somebody else Mario Party Jamboree. So be on the lookout for that. That will be on our YouTube. I may put it on our Twitter just to point people to the YouTube, but I'd really like to have people comment within the YouTube area. But as I said, we are at Lessons for Gaming LFG on YouTube. My handle on X or Twitter is at ZeffEpics. Gab, do you want to give yours?
Sure. My handle is at GavelGamer.
Yeah. And so thank you so much for being here with us on this episode. I feel like we had a lot of really great, interesting discussion, and I appreciate you as always, Gab. So to all of those in the audience, thank you so much for learning with us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Always appreciate you, Zeff. Thank you.